Hello, my name is Caleb. 3 years ago, I stopped coming home because every visit ended the same way. My mother apologizing for things she never did, and a man at the head of the table acting like he owned her dignity. But last Friday at lunch, he went too far. My stepfather raised his glass, looked straight at my mother, and said, "I only married her out of pity. Who else would want a fat, old woman like that?" His family laughed. My mother lowered her head, her hands trembling on the tablecloth she had stitched herself. That's when I stood up, smiled, and said one sentence that wiped the smile right off his face. Because by the end of that lunch, the man who thought he owned my mother's house was about to lose everything. My name is Caleb Wright. I am 31 years old. I work as a real estate attorney in Chicago, Illinois, which is funny because the very thing I spend my days protecting, property rights, legal ownership, people's homes, is exactly what was being stolen from my mother right under her nose for years. I drive a used Honda. I make my own coffee every morning, and I call my mother every Sunday. Or at least I used to, before Roger came along and started answering her phone like he paid the bills. I am not the kind of man who raises his voice at dinner tables. I was raised by a woman who taught me that class is what you show when you have every reason to lose it, but choose not to. My mother, Linda Wright, is one of those women who could make a stranger feel like family in under 5 minutes. She bakes. She sews. She remembers birthdays. She once drove 45 minutes in a snowstorm to bring soup to a neighbor she barely knew because she heard the woman had a cold. That is the kind of woman my mother is. And that is exactly the kind of woman that a man like Roger Dalton saw as easy. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers. But I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these stories matter. Roger came into our lives 6 years ago. My father passed when I was 22, heart attack. Sudden, no warning. One Tuesday morning, he was eating scrambled eggs and complaining about the weather. And by Thursday, he was gone. My mother grieved the way quiet people grieve. She didn't make a scene. She didn't fall apart in public. She just got a little smaller, a little softer, like a light being slowly turned down. She still made his favorite meals on his birthday. She still slept on her side of the bed for 2 years after he died. So when Roger showed up at her church's weekend potluck with his big smile and his press shirt and his very rehearsed charm, I didn't blame her for being flattered. My mother was lonely. She was 61 years old, living alone in the house she and my father had bought together in Dayton, Ohio, and her only son was 300 miles away trying to build a career. I get it. I really do. What I did not get, what I will never fully understand, is how fast Roger moved. Within 4 months of meeting her, he had moved his belongings into her garage. Not the house yet, just the garage. He played it smart. He told her he was between places, that his lease had ended unexpectedly, that he just needed a few weeks. My mother, being my mother, said yes. She even cleaned out half the garage to make space for his stuff. She told me about it over the phone like it was a sweet story. I remember sitting in my car in a parking garage in Chicago gripping my steering wheel, asking myself if I was overreacting. I was not overreacting. By month 6, Roger was eating dinner at her table every night. By month 8, he had a key to the front door. By the time they got married, a small ceremony at the courthouse that I found out about 2 days before it happened, not 2 weeks, 2 days, Roger had settled into my mother's house like a man who had always been there, like he had paid for the furniture, like the photos of my father on the wall were decorations he had simply decided to tolerate. I flew in for the courthouse wedding. I wore a suit. I shook his hand. I smiled at my mother because she looked happy and I loved her. And I thought maybe I was wrong about him. Then at the small dinner afterward, Roger made a joke about how my father's old recliner needed to go because it was ugly and depressing. He laughed. His 2 adult sons from his first marriage laughed. My mother smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "We'll see." I knew then. I just didn't know how bad it would get. The first year of their marriage was what I would call the slow boil. Roger didn't suddenly become a monster overnight. That is not how these men work. It started with small things. He would make comments about my mother's cooking at the table. Not cruel comments, just dismissive ones. "This is a bit heavy, Linda." Or "Did you follow the recipe or just wing it again?" Always with that half smile, like it was a joke. His sons would chuckle. My mother would quietly take her plate to the kitchen. Then came the financial creeping. Roger had retired early from some mid-level management job and got a modest pension. Not enough to be comfortable, but enough to look comfortable if you borrowed from someone who was. He convinced my mother to add his name to her bank account for emergencies. He started handling the bills to take the stress off her. Within 18 months, my mother had no real idea what was happening with the money my father had left her. Every time she asked, Roger would sigh like she was being difficult, and she would apologize for asking. She would apologize for asking about her own money. I found out about most of this in pieces. A comment here, a nervous laugh there. My mother never came out and said things directly. She had spent a lifetime being a peacekeeper. And even when the peace wasn't real, she kept trying to make it. I pushed when I could. She pushed back and told me Roger was a good man, and I just didn't know him well enough. So I stayed away more than I should have. I told myself she was an adult. I told myself she had made her choice. And every Sunday phone call, I listened to her talk about her garden and her church group and her grandniece's dance recital. And I pretended not to notice the tiredness underneath all of it. Then 3 years ago, during a Christmas visit, I finally saw it clearly. Roger's 2 sons, Troy and Dennis, had come for the holiday. They were loud men, not dangerous, just the kind of loud that fills every room and leaves no space for anyone else. Roger was different around them, bigger, more confident, more careless. He made a comment about my mother's weight at the Christmas dinner table, something about how she should watch the gravy because she wasn't the same size she was when they met. Troy and Dennis laughed. My mother stared at her plate. I said something, quietly but clearly. I told Roger that was an unkind thing to say. Roger looked at me with this expression, amused, almost bored, and said, "Relax, son. We're all family here." The word son from his mouth hit me like a slap. I left the next morning before anyone woke up. I texted my mother that I had an early work call. She texted back a single heart emoji. That was the last Christmas I spent in that house. For 3 years after that, I kept my distance. Monthly calls, the occasional birthday card. I sent money when I thought she needed it, though I later learned Roger was keeping a close eye on what came in. My mother and I existed in this strange, careful relationship where we loved each other completely and talked about almost nothing real. And then 2 months ago, something changed. My mother called me on a Wednesday, not a Sunday. Wednesday. That alone told me something was wrong. She said she wanted me to come home for a family lunch that Roger was organizing. His extended family would be there. She said it in that particular voice she uses when she's asking me to do something she knows I won't want to do. The voice that is half request and half apology before I've even responded. I almost said no. I had a full week, a case I was in the middle of, 300 miles between me and that dining room. But something in her voice that Wednesday, something small and tired and barely there, made me say yes. I said yes, and I started making phone calls, not to clear my schedule, to a private investigator I had used twice before on cases. His name is Walt. He is thorough, discreet, and worth every cent. I told Walt everything I knew about Roger Dalton and told him I needed the full picture within 6 weeks. Walt came back to me in 4. What he found changed everything. Now, I want to pause here for just a second. If this story is hitting close to home for you, or if you know someone who has been taken advantage of the way my mother was, please subscribe and share this, because stories like this one matter. They shine a light on things that too many people suffer in silence. Hit that subscribe button and let's keep going. Roger Dalton had been married twice before my mother. Not once, twice. His first wife had passed away. His second wife, a woman named Patricia who lived in Columbus, had divorced him 8 years before he met my mother. The divorce had been ugly. Patricia had claimed in court documents that Walt obtained legally and sent to me as a PDF at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, that Roger had gradually transferred significant marital assets into his own sole account during the last 2 years of their marriage. The judge had partially ruled in her favor, but Roger had hidden enough that she never fully recovered what was taken. He had done it before. He had a system, but that was not the worst part. The worst part was the house. My mother's house, the house she and my father had bought in 1989, the house I grew up in, the house with the garden my father planted, and the tablecloth my mother stitched by hand. Roger had convinced my mother to refinance it 18 months into their marriage. He told her it was to get a better interest rate. He had her sign documents at a kitchen table, explained them quickly, assured her it was routine. My mother trusted him. She signed. What she had signed, buried inside the refinancing paperwork, was a document that made the house jointly owned, equally, 50-50. Roger Dalton now owned half my mother's house, the house my father worked 30 years to pay off. I sat with that information for 2 days. I did not sleep much. I drank too much coffee. I walked around my apartment at 2 in the morning talking to myself like a man who had temporarily lost his mind. My mother did not know. She had no idea. She thought the refinancing was just about interest rates. I called Walt back and asked him if there was any legal path to undo what had been done. Walt said that depended on a few things: whether the signing could be shown to have happened without full informed consent, whether there was a pattern of financial deception, and whether my mother was willing to pursue it. That last part was the hard part, because getting my mother to go against Roger, to admit she had been fooled, to stand up in a legal process, to face the embarrassment of it, was going to take something bigger than me showing up with a folder of documents and saying, "Trust me." I needed Roger to show his true face, clearly, undeniably, in front of witnesses. So I accepted the lunch invitation. I drove to Dayton on a Friday morning, 300 miles. I had a bag in the back seat with 3 things in it: a change of clothes, my laptop, and a folder that Walt had prepared for me. I also had a conversation scheduled for 2 hours before the lunch with a family law attorney in Dayton named Rebecca Osei, who had been recommended to me by 2 separate colleagues and who had, according to her reviews, a particular specialty in asset recovery cases involving elder financial exploitation. Rebecca and I met at a coffee shop near her office. She was sharp, direct, and did not waste time. She reviewed Walt's documents. She asked me a series of very specific questions. Then she looked at me over her coffee cup and said that if things went the way I suspected they might at this lunch, and if my mother was willing to move forward, she believed they had a strong case. She also told me something I had not expected. Roger had taken out a home equity line of credit against the house 6 months ago. He had not told my mother. He had used his legal ownership stake to access nearly $40,000. The money had gone into a personal account that my mother had no access to. He wasn't just humiliating her. He was cleaning her out slowly. And when he was done, he would either leave or make her life small enough that she would. I drove to the house with my hands steady on the wheel and something cold and very focused sitting in my chest. The lunch was set for 1 o'clock. I arrived at noon. My mother opened the door, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. She looked tired in a way that photographs don't show. The kind of tired that settles into a person's posture, into the way they hold their shoulders slightly forward, like they're always braced for something. She had made herself up nicely. She was wearing a blouse I recognized from years ago. She hugged me longer than usual. "I'm glad you came," she whispered. "I know," I said. "Me too." Roger came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder, playing the role of gracious host. He shook my hand with that firm handshake men like him use to establish something. "Caleb, good to see you. Long drive?" He smiled like a man who had already won. "Not bad," I said, and I smiled back because I had learned something from my mother. Smile. Keep your cards close. Wait. His family arrived over the next 40 minutes. Troy and Dennis, Roger's sons, each with their wives. Roger's sister, a woman named Brenda, who laughed at everything Roger said with the devotion of someone who had been doing it since childhood. A couple named Phil and Kathy, who I had never met, but who seemed to be Roger's oldest friends. And my mother's neighbor, Gloria, who had been invited and who sat next to my mother like a small guard dog who sensed something in the air. The table was set beautifully. My mother had cooked for most of the morning, I could tell. There was roast chicken and mashed potatoes and a green bean casserole and fresh rolls that she had made from scratch because that is who she is. Roger sat at the head of the table. My mother sat to his left. I sat directly across from Roger, which was not an accident. For the first 30 minutes, lunch was fine. Loud and fine. Troy talked about his new truck. Dennis talked about a fishing trip. Brenda laughed at everything. Roger held court like a man in his own kingdom, refilling wine glasses and making little remarks that kept everyone looking at him. My mother got up 3 times to bring things from the kitchen. Nobody offered to help her. I got up the second time she did and helped her carry dishes back. Roger watched us with an expression that was hard to read. Then came a toast. Roger stood up. He lifted his wine glass. He had the particular look of a man who is about to say something he thinks is witty and has been sitting on all afternoon. The table went quiet. "I want to say something," Roger said, "about this beautiful home and this beautiful table." He gestured around with his glass. "And about the woman who, in her own way, makes it all possible." My mother looked up. There was a small, hopeful expression on her face. The kind of expression that breaks your heart a little when you know what's coming next. Roger smiled. "I only married her out of pity, of course." He chuckled. "I mean, who else would want a fat old woman like that?" The table, his side of the table, laughed. Troy barked out a laugh. Dennis shook his head, grinning. Brenda tittered. Phil laughed into his napkin. Kathy smiled uncomfortably but said nothing. My mother's face went still. She lowered her head. Her hands went to the tablecloth, the one she had stitched herself, pale blue with small white flowers, and her fingers gripped it just slightly, the way you grip something when you are trying very hard not to show that you're drowning. Gloria, sitting beside her, put a hand on her arm. I set my fork down. I looked at Roger. He was still smiling, basking in it. That particular satisfaction of a man who has just reminded everyone at the table, including the woman sitting next to him, exactly where she stands. I stood up. The table shifted. Some people noticed. Roger looked at me with mild curiosity, like I was a minor interruption. I smiled, slowly. I made sure he saw the smile, and then I said it. "Roger, I think it's time we talked about the home equity line of credit you took out on my mother's house. All $40,000 of it. The account she doesn't know about." The room went completely still. Roger's smile did not fall off his face immediately. It sorts of melted, slowly, like a wax figure left too close to a heat source. His eyes shifted. Something moved behind them, not guilt exactly, but something closer to calculation. The look of the man whose next move has suddenly become unclear. "What are you talking about?" he said, and his voice was still confident, but there was something thin about the confidence now. "I'm talking about the document you had my mother sign 18 months into your marriage," I said. I kept my voice completely even, calm, like we were discussing the weather or the roast chicken, which was excellent, by the way. My mother really outdid herself. The one that transferred half ownership of this house to your name, without her fully understanding what she was signing. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I had moved the key documents there before lunch, because I am an attorney and I think ahead, and I placed 2 folded pages on the table in front of me. "I also have documentation of your divorce proceedings with Patricia in Columbus," I said, "and a record of the asset transfers you made during the last 2 years of that marriage. It's an interesting pattern, Roger. It really is," Troy said. "Now wait a minute." "Troy," I said pleasantly. "I'll get to you in a moment if you keep talking." Troy closed his mouth. I almost felt sorry about how quickly he did it. Roger put his wine glass down. He was no longer smiling. The color in his face had shifted, not pale, but different, like a light changing. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "That refinancing was completely legal. She signed it." "She signed it," I agreed, "at a kitchen table, with no independent legal counsel, after you told her it was a routine interest rate adjustment. I have the original conversation documented. You said it yourself to her neighbor Gloria here, who I did speak to before today." I looked at Gloria. She gave a single firm nod. "Gloria was present when you explained the refinancing to my mother, and she remembers what you said quite clearly." Roger looked at Gloria. Gloria looked right back at him. She did not look away. "On top of that," I continued, and I was aware that the entire table was completely silent, not awkward quiet, the kind of silence where nobody breathes. "The home equity line of credit you accessed 6 months ago, without telling my mother, that's a separate issue. That $40,000 drawn against a jointly titled property without the co-owner's knowledge or consent is something that Rebecca Osei. She's a family law attorney here in Dayton. Excellent woman. We had coffee this morning. Finds very interesting." Roger stood up. "This is my house." "It is half your house," I said, "currently, and there is an active legal question about how it became that. But here's the thing, Roger." I picked up the documents and straightened them very calmly, like a man who has all the time in the world. "You have a choice right now. You can make this loud and ugly and public and spend the next 18 months in court while Rebecca and I build a financial exploitation case that, if successful, means you walk away from this house with nothing. Not half, nothing. Because Ohio law has specific provisions about asset fraud in elder financial exploitation cases." I paused. "Or," I said, "you can sign a voluntary quitclaim deed transferring your ownership of this property back to my mother, in full, along with a repayment agreement for the $40,000. And you can do it quietly, without a court case, without Roger Dalton's name appearing in any public record connected to the words elder financial exploitation." The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Before we get to what Roger did next, and trust me, you need to hear what happened. If this story has kept you watching this far, please subscribe right now. I release new stories every week, and every single one of them is about real consequences, real justice, and real people standing up for what is right. Hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second, and it means everything. Roger sat back down, not because he was calm, because his legs seemed to have decided sitting was a better option than standing. His son Troy leaned over and said something to him in a low voice. Roger shook his head once sharply. Brenda looked between her brother and me like she was watching a tennis match, and had just realized she bet on the wrong player. Dennis was staring at his plate. My mother had not moved. She was still looking at the tablecloth, at her own hands on it, and I could not fully see her expression from where I stood, but I saw her shoulders, and somewhere in the middle of what I was saying, they had stopped being hunched forward. They had straightened, very slightly, but I saw it. Roger looked at me for a long moment. The smile was completely gone. What was left on his face was something raw, not remorse. I want to be honest here. I do not think Roger Dalton is a man who feels remorse the way most people do. What was there was a cold and careful assessment, the look of a man who was very rapidly recalculating. "You rehearsed this," he said, almost admiringly. "Almost." "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference. Rehearsing is for actors. Preparing is for people who are going to win." Brenda laughed. Not her usual Roger-pleasing laugh. A genuine, surprised laugh that she immediately covered with her hand. Roger looked at her. She looked at the table. "You can't force me to sign anything," Roger said. But it was quieter now. The bluster was leaking out of him like air from a tire. "You're right," I said. "I cannot force you. What I can do is have Rebecca file the complaint on Monday morning, begin the discovery process, and make sure that Patricia in Columbus, who I have also spoken to, and who has been waiting for years for exactly this kind of opportunity, is available as a witness." I let that sit. "Patricia said to tell you hello, by the way." Roger went very still. There it was. The thing Walt found that I had saved for last. Patricia was not just a bitter ex-wife. Patricia had kept records, meticulous ones, because she had suspected Roger would do this again to someone else, and she had been waiting. And when Walt reached out to her, she had picked up the phone on the first ring and talked for 2 hours without stopping. Roger knew what Patricia had. He knew exactly what Patricia had. His face did something complicated. A series of small shifts that happened quickly and then settled into something I can only describe as a man arriving at the shore of a decision he didn't want to make. He looked at my mother. My mother looked up, and for the first time during that whole lunch, she looked directly at him. She did not look away. She did not apologize. She did not soften her expression. She just looked at him with those tired, clear eyes and said nothing, because she didn't need to. Roger looked at me. "I want to talk to my sons," he said. "Of course," I said. I picked up my documents, folded them back into my pocket, and sat down. I picked up my fork. I looked at the roast chicken on my plate. It really was excellent. Troy and Dennis followed Roger into the kitchen. The door swung partially closed behind them. The rest of the table sat in the kind of silence that follows something significant. Phil was studying the wall. Kathy was looking at her hands. Brenda was looking at me with an expression that was almost respectful. Gloria leaned over and refilled my mother's water glass. My mother reached over and held Gloria's hand for a moment. Neither of them said anything. After 11 minutes, I know because I counted, which is what I do when I am nervous and pretending not to be nervous. Roger came back to the table alone. He sat down. He picked up his wine glass and looked at it and set it back down without drinking. "I'll sign the deed," he said, quietly. No performance in it. My mother closed her eyes for just a moment. One breath. Then she opened them and nodded. Once. "The repayment agreement too," I said. A pause. "Yes." "Monday morning?" I said. "Rebecca's office. Both documents. If you need the address, I can send it to you tonight." "I know how to find a lawyer's office," Roger said. "I know you do," I said. Roger stood up. He looked around the table at his family. At Troy and Dennis, who had come back and behind him and were standing near the doorway. At Brenda, who was very carefully not meeting his eyes. At Phil and Kathy, who both seemed to have developed a sudden intense interest in their food. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. "I'm going to get some air," he said. He walked to the front door. He opened it. He stepped outside. He did not come back. Troy and Dennis left 20 minutes later, brief and stiff. Brenda hugged my mother at the door with genuine feeling and whispered something to her that I could not hear. Phil and Kathy said quiet goodbyes and thanked my mother for the food, which, they both said, was really wonderful. I am not being sarcastic when I say that. And then it was just me, my mother, and Gloria sitting at the table surrounded by dishes and leftover food and the strange, large quiet that follows a storm. My mother looked at me for a long moment. "You talked to Patricia," she said. "Yes." And Gloria, "Yes." "And you had an attorney before you even walked in today." "Yes." She was quiet. Then she said, "You drove 300 miles for lunch. Best roast chicken in Ohio," I said. She laughed. It came out of her like something that had been held in for too long. A real laugh, the kind that takes over your whole face. She covered her mouth with both hands and laughed, and then she was crying and laughing at the same time. And I got up and went around the table and hugged her, and she put her arms around me and held on tight. "I was so embarrassed," she said against my shoulder. At the table, when he said that, I didn't know what to do. I never know what to do. "You didn't have to do anything," I said. "That's what I'm here for." "Your father," she said. She stopped, started again. "Your father would have done the same thing." I held on tighter. "I learned for the best," I said. Gloria quietly got up and started gathering dishes. She is a very smart woman, Gloria. She knew when to give people space and when to just do the dishes. The Monday morning meeting at Rebecca's office lasted 2.5 hours. Roger came with a personal attorney, a man in his 50s who looked like he had seen situations like this before and had correctly assessed that this was not a winnable fight. The quitclaim deed was signed. The repayment agreement was drawn up. Roger would repay the $40,000 in structured monthly payments over 3 years. Rebecca was clear that any default would immediately trigger the full legal case, including Patricia's testimony. Roger signed everything in a room that was very quiet and very professional and had absolutely no drama in it, which is exactly how legal proceedings should go. He signed with the focused attention of a man who has decided that losing quietly is better than losing loudly. I shook his attorney's hand. I did not shake Roger's. Outside on the sidewalk, Rebecca turned to me and said, "You want to know the interesting thing about men like him?" "Tell me," I said. "They always underestimate the quiet ones," she said. I thought about my mother stitching that tablecloth. I thought about 30 years of Sunday phone calls. I thought about a man at the head of a table, raising a glass, completely certain that nobody in that room had the tools or the nerve to take him apart. "Yeah," I said, "they really do." 3 weeks after the documents were signed, my mother called me on a Sunday, the usual time, but she sounded different. She told me that she had gone out to the garden that morning for the first time in months and replanted the rose bushes along the back fence that my father had originally put in. She said she had also, with Gloria's help, rearranged the living room, moved my father's old recliner back to where it used to be, and taken down a large framed print that Roger had chosen and put in the hallway. In its place, she had hung the photograph from my parents' wedding. "I forgot how handsome he was," she said, and she was smiling. I could hear it. Roger had moved out the week after the Monday meeting. He had taken his things methodically, efficiently, the way a man packs when he knows there is no argument to be made. He left the house exactly as it had been, except for a slight dent in the drywall near the hallway closet that he said was already there. It was not already there, but it was a dent in drywall and not anything that mattered. So we let it go. There is a point at which getting everything is less important than being free. The divorce proceedings were straightforward. Roger, advised by his attorney and by the reality of his own situation, did not contest anything. He waived any claim to the property. He agreed to the repayment schedule. He went away. My mother is still at the house. It is fully hers again. Her name only on every document. Rebecca made sure of that personally. She kept the tablecloth. I am glad about the tablecloth. I visit more now, not just at holidays. I have made a habit of driving down on the occasional weekend, no particular occasion, just to sit at the kitchen table and eat whatever my mother decides to make, which is always too much food and always excellent. She is brighter than she has been in years. She laughs more easily. She started a small quilting group with Gloria and 2 other women from the church, and they meet every Thursday and apparently talk at a volume that can be heard 2 houses down. She sleeps on her side of the bed, but it is only her bed now, and she does not look apologetic about anything. I think about what Roger said at that lunch sometimes. Who else would want a fat, old woman like that? He said it to make her feel like nothing. He said it to remind her, in front of an audience, that she was lucky to have him, that she was someone to be pitied and tolerated and managed. What he didn't know, what he had never taken the time to understand about my mother, is that she is the kind of woman who stitches a tablecloth by hand, who drives 45 minutes in a snowstorm to bring soup to a sick neighbor, who grieves quietly and loves loudly and raised a son who pays attention. Men like Roger look at women like my mother and see softness as weakness. They see patience as permission. They see someone who doesn't raise her voice and decide that means she has no power. They're always wrong about that. My mother named her rose bushes again after she replanted them. She used to do that when I was little, give the roses names. She does not tell me what she named them this time. She says that is between her and the garden. I think one of them is named something very satisfying. As for Roger Dalton, the last I heard through Rebecca's office, he had moved to an apartment in Columbus. Modest, nothing like what he had been living in. I understand he reached out to Patricia at some point after everything happened. I do not know what he said. I do not think about him very much. He is a man who built his life by taking from people who trusted him. And now he sits in a Columbus apartment with a repayment schedule and a very much smaller life. I will tell you this. I do not feel sorry for him, not even a little. But here is the part one want to end on, because this is the part that matters most to me. A few weeks after everything was settled, I was helping my mother sort through some boxes in the spare room. Old things, photographs, documents, household items from years back. In one of the boxes, I found an old birthday card. It was addressed to me in my father's handwriting. He had written it for my 21st birthday, a month before he passed. I had never opened it. It had gotten lost in the move from my childhood bedroom, and I had forgotten it existed. I sat on the floor of the spare room and opened it. Inside, my father had written one paragraph. He was not a man of many words, my father. He was like my mother in that way, quiet, patient, someone who said important things carefully and only when he meant them. He wrote, "Caleb, the job of a good man is not to be the loudest one in the room. It's to be the one still standing when the loud ones are gone. Take care of your mother. She will never ask you to. That's exactly why you should." I sat with that card in my hands for a while, and I folded it carefully. I put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, where I had kept the documents I brought to the lunch, where I keep important things. And I went downstairs to help my mother decide where to hang the next photograph. And that is where our story ends. But before you go, I want to ask you something simple. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or if it made you feel something real, don't let that feeling just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button right now. Every week, I bring you stories just like this one. Stories about people who were pushed too far, who stood up anyway, and who won in ways that actually matter. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Also, drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? Was it the lunch table? The card from his father? I read every single comment, and I would love to hear from you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And as always, thank you for being here. See you in the next one.